Hey guys, Spazzy Dragon here, aka Syndromes, and you are about to watch a new type of video that I've personally never had the chance to make. To set things right, this type of video is inspired by the adventures of the All Guardsman Party text-to-speech write uploaded by the user the Neckbeard Cave. For some reason I was about to say cafe, but there you go. And the link to that video you can find in the video description. I watched these videos of his, and I was very surprised how the text-to-speech function enhanced the overall fun of reading what is essentially just a post. So I thought, well, maybe I can try to imitate this sort of approach when it comes to roleplay things and disco stories in general. So if you might want to see more of these kinds of videos, this is only a test, but I have a couple of episodes written, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but until then, my voice is about to be replaced by a text-to-speech. So, with that in mind, have fun.
Planet Houston is a shithole. Actually, any sane libertonian would have told you that in a heartbeat. Honestly, Planet Houston, which was located in the Texas system, outright seemed to remind me of some scary bedtime story you'd tell your kids if they were naughty. For anyone living under the relative sanity of Planet Manhattan, Houston and its very existence seemed as far away as the houses of Britonia or Rainland. And perhaps for all intents and purposes, that was in fact the case. And that place just so happened to be my home. My old home, to be exact. And yet that was a long time ago. Let us return to the present. Now my home was this tiny shower stall-sized life support pod. Again. I remember them telling me that this shit pit was an interesting place. The first time I ended up here was the same as for most of my kind. If you were someone living in the poverty and nihilism of Houston, and had nothing else to lose, then the though of leaving the planet and the vastness of space as well as the loose grip of authority there was like a dream. And there was only one way to get off this damn rock. Prison Station Sugarland. Let it be fucking known, never employ a company as your house-wide police institution. The LPI were deviously cunning, or at least they were, when it came to their criminal screening and sorting. You only had to look either smart, or be built like a brick shit house, and chances were that your talents could be put to good use if walled in the prison manufacturing blocks. For someone without a home and starving, you can see how this might be a tempting consideration to make. After all, they had to keep you alive for you to work. For some this was enough. I knew people who would stage drastic attempts at crime just to land a one-way trip to the big floating cube in the sky. That is, if they didn't get shot at the scene of the crime. I wasn't as desperate back then. But Sugarland was one of the only places where I could meet a very specific kind of people. It was actually funny how easy you could find them in something as large and chaotic as a giant off-world prison. You just had to look around for the skinny guys who didn't have punched out teeth and black eyes. They were also usually oddly in the company of far more physically gifted blokes. They also had a funny name. I remember my first ever talk with one of those lanky fucks. "Are you Fulton?" I asked. The look he gave me spoke that yes, he indeed was Fulton. A Fulton, that is. All of these people went by the same name, and for some reason I felt as though all of them seemed to have the same personality. That skinny shit stain of man bore into me with his gaze, as if a demon who was judging how much my soul was worth. And by Christ, it wasn't far too off from the truth. After all, he got to decide if I was even worth putting his work and effort into. The talk was brief. I told him my skills even as his so-called friends were dumbly picking at their noses. I took my time to explain my reasons to contact him, then proceeded to tell him my experiences with combat ships and certain other skills that I had acquired over the years. It seemed as though I gave off the impression that I knew what I was rambling about, because here I'm now, in this damn little box. Of course I did not tell him that those were mostly VR simulations. He did not need to know. If you were stupid enough to lie about your skills to a Fulton, you would be regretting it until the end of your days. After all, the result in contacting these people was you ending up in perhaps an even more dangerous situation than an off-world prison filled with degenerates and murderers. Later that day I did not bother introducing myself to my cellmates. I simply made it known to them that I wasn't there for long. Or so I hoped. Thankfully it was quickly made apparent that they knew the drill and did not question me further about anything. All I had to do was wait for the Fulton to do whatever it was they did. How they got their names and how they did their trade was a secret to only them and them alone. And I wasn't about to pry. After all, I might have very much end up needing his so-called services again. The news of my transfer came later. 2 officers stopped by our cozy little cell that was filled with 20 inmates and with bunk beds stacked 2 stories high. One of them called out my name, Hubert Bellhouse. Due to, as they were quickly to say, the severity of my crimes, I was being transferred to Attica Supermax. The name alone made some of the eyebrows rise. Attica was the most infamous prison in Liberty, and for good reasons. My temporary cellmates, was it respect? No. The rest of the inmates in that cell probably knew why I was heading there. For processing, as they would have probably put it. The only reason why I wasn't panicking today is because I now know how this all goes. To date this is a dance I have danced before. Today, like before, I was led down into the lower portions of the station and I could not help but to remember the past times I had taken this little excursion. Sometimes there was a fork in the road and the 2 officers behind me were keen on not telling me which to take until it was too late. After a barked out "over here, you cretin," they quickly reminded me which path to take, but not before their baton came down on my shoulder. Today was no exception. I'm still not convinced these were not the same people. The place is a maze. Even with how many times I returned here, I cannot remember the way to the docks. One of the officers was quick to laugh how they prepared a befitting ship for my transfer. I had to squint to find it in the huge hangar area as ships were both landing and taking off. The ones leaving were not prisoner transports, no, but rather huge haulers full of manufactured goods by the station factories. Goods that, as I had to remind myself, I might have ended up having to slave at and process myself. I finally found the ship the fat fuck was pointing at. Yes, he was right. It wasn't a Pelican armored transport. It wasn't the sleek and gorgeous Grizzly shuttle. Not at all. Instead, me and other transferees were being led to the lowered and deployed cargo pods of a nearby stationed Gull transport. A simple, crude way to transfer humans. Similar to cattle. I soon found myself standing in a slowly progressing line. Once at the front I could finally see how it was done as the man in front of me became a passenger. It really reminded me chefs hanging rows of sausages for smoking. Each pod was smaller than a shower stall, but designed similarly. Down to the grilled hole in the floor that doubled both as a toilet and the intake of the air circulation system. Once the passenger was secured in his pod, it was lifted up and into one of the 2 cargo containers of that Gull, each of which could fit roughly 1,000 of these tiny pods and their unfortunate cargo. The pods themselves were airtight and provided some protection from radiation, but it was clear that the things were designed for short-term flights. It only made me wonder if the poor fools on planet Pittsburgh had better accommodations on their trip to Malta. Let it be fucking known. Never trust a corporation as your police. The amount of calculated corner cutting was astounding, and perhaps even commendable. Or I would have thought that, if it wasn't me stepping into one of these pods. The sliding door closed and sealed shut. And so here I am. Again. Finally. Finally I can close my eyes and sleep. At least for a little while. The awakening was rude as always. The ship-wide alarm could be heard even by whatever connection the pods had with the rest of the hull. So were the sounds of impacts. Then the sounds of explosions. The sounds of metal being bent, torn apart and shredded as whatever force was applied to it was clearly magnitude stronger than anything the ship alloy was designed to handle. Then, finally, inevitably came the all too familiar feeling of acceleration and then nothing, blackness, as my brain decided that it was better for me to take a forced nap rather than trying to process what was going on while being rattled around the tiny little cabin. I always hated this part, I thought to myself as I was slowly drifting into that blissful sleep. I always had a feeling whoever led the attack next time would miss, and my last memory was of a human-sized bolt of antimatter engulfing my pod instead of the transport's bridge. Damn it. Hubert Bellhouse, one of the transferees lost in a recent attack on a police convoy near the North Dallas debris field. Incident pending investigation.